They vanished when I needed them most. Not a single call, not one text, not even a flowers and get well card when I was lying in that hospital bed, wondering if I'd make it through the night. But when my sister's dream wedding needed $25,000, suddenly I was family again. They didn't want me there. They just wanted my wallet. And this time, I swear I won't let it slide. My name is Madison Clark, and I should have died alone. That's what kept running through my head during those endless hours in room 214 at Mission Hospital in Asheville. The morphine made everything fuzzy around the edges, but that thought stayed crystal clear. 32 years old, and I was about to check out of this world with nobody giving a damn. The surgery had been brutal. What started as routine gallbladder removal turned into a nightmare when they found the infection had spread. Sepsis, they called it. A fancy word for, your body is trying to kill itself. Dr. Martinez had pulled me aside before they wheeled me into the OR, his voice gentle but honest. Madison, I need you to understand, this is serious. Do you have someone we should call? I'd given them my parents' number, my sister Emily's too, even my Aunt Carol, who lived just 2 hours away in Knoxville. They'll be here. I'd told him with confidence that now felt pathetic. My family doesn't mess around when it comes to stuff like this. That was 3 days ago. 3 days of staring at the same beige walls, watching the same terrible daytime TV, listening to the same mechanical beeping of machines that were apparently keeping me alive. 3 days of jumping every time footsteps echoed in the hallway, thinking maybe this time it would be Mom with her worried face and homemade cookies, or Emily with one of her dramatic entrances and arms full of flowers. Instead, I got nurses whose names I'd memorized. Sarah, the one with kind eyes who always asked about my pain level. Marcus, who cracked jokes while checking my IV. And Janet, the night shift veteran who'd seen everything and judged nothing. They were strangers, but they cared more about whether I lived or died than my own flesh and blood. My phone sat on the rolling table beside my bed like a silent accusation. I'd sent the texts myself after the surgery, once I was coherent enough to type. Simple messages. In the hospital. Had complications with surgery. Room 214 at Mission if anyone wants to visit. Emily had read it. Those little blue check marks on WhatsApp don't lie. So had Mom. Dad probably never even looked at his phone. He was old school that way. But Mom would have told him. She told him everything. The responses had been minimal. Oh no, hope you feel better soon, from Emily. Praying for you, sweetie, from Mom. Nothing from Dad. That was it. No follow-up questions about what happened, how long I'd be here, if I needed anything. No, we're on our way, or see you soon. Just digital thoughts and prayers, the modern equivalent of doing absolutely nothing while feeling good about yourself. I'd made excuses for them at first. Emily was probably busy with wedding planning. Her engagement to Robert had turned her into a full-time event coordinator for her own life. Mom and Dad, well, they'd never been the type to drop everything for anything. They were practical people, not dramatic ones. Maybe they figured I was fine if I could text. But as the hours crawled by and my phone stayed silent, those excuses started crumbling like stale cookies. This wasn't about being dramatic. This was about almost dying. This was about lying in a hospital bed at 2 a.m, wondering if the next time I closed my eyes would be the last time, and having nobody to call who would actually answer. The worst part wasn't even their absence. It was how familiar it felt. I'd been the responsible one for so long. I'd forgotten what it was like to need someone else. I was the one who handled Mom's financial emergencies, usually around Christmas when she'd overspent on gifts she couldn't afford. I was the one Emily called when her rent was due and her restaurant job wasn't cutting it. I was the steady, reliable Madison who worked at Summit Strategies downtown, who had her own apartment and her own car and her own savings account that somehow never seemed to grow because there was always someone in the family who needed a loan. But when I was the one lying in a hospital bed with tubes coming out of my arms and a fever that wouldn't break crickets, The realization hit me like a freight train somewhere around hour 65 of my solo hospital stay. I wasn't their daughter or sister. I was their ATM with feelings. And ATMs don't need visitors when they break down. They just need to get fixed so they can dispense cash again. By the time Dr. A. Martinez cleared me for discharge on day 4, I'd stopped checking my phone, I'd stopped making excuses, and I'd started making plans. Not big, dramatic plans, I wasn't that type, but quiet, determined plans about what my life was going to look like moving forward. As I signed the discharge papers with a hand that still shook from weakness, I made myself a promise. The next time my family needed something from me, they better damn well have earned it, because this Madison, the one who'd survived sepsis and 4 days of family abandonment, wasn't the same pushover who'd walked into this hospital. She was someone entirely different, someone who'd finally learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. And someone who was about to find out which one hurt more. The apartment I found was nothing like the house I'd grown up in. No sprawling backyard, no 3-car garage, no granite countertops that Mom loved to brag about to her book club friends. Just 800 square feet on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian near downtown Asheville, with hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places and windows that actually opened to let in real air instead of whatever artificial stuff had been pumping through my old place. I signed the lease 2 weeks after getting out of the hospital, when I was still moving like an old woman and my incision site ached every time I bent over. The landlord, Mrs. Patterson, was probably in her 70s with silver hair and the kind of direct gaze that said she'd seen every type of tenant disaster imaginable. "Shh, you sure you can handle the stairs?" she'd asked, watching me grip the banister a little too tightly as we climbed to the 3rd floor. "I'm recovering from surgery," I'd told her, "but I'm not fragile." She'd smiled at that. "Good. Fragile doesn't last long in this world." Moving in was like shedding an old skin. I donated half my furniture to Goodwill, all the stuff that reminded me of family dinners and holiday gatherings and the life I'd been living for other people. The oversized dining table that seated 8 but usually fed only me. The fancy china set Mom had insisted I needed for when you have company. The expensive couch I'd bought because Emily said it would photograph well for Instagram. What I kept fit perfectly in my new space. A simple couch the color of storm clouds. A small dining table for 2. Optimistic, but not desperately so. Bookshelves that I actually filled with books instead of decorative objects that gathered dust. A bed that was mine and only mine, positioned so I could see the mountains through the bedroom window when I woke up. The routine I built felt like putting on clothes that actually fit for the first time in years. 5:30 a.m. every day. I was up and pulling on running shoes that I'd bought but never used. The streets of Asheville at dawn were a revelation, quiet enough to hear your own breathing, but alive with the kind of energy that comes from a city that hasn't fully woken up yet. I started with 20-minute walks, graduated to 30-minute jogs, and by month 2 I was running a full 5-mile loop through the River Arts District and back. The other runners nodded when they passed. Nothing dramatic, just that acknowledgement that happens between people who've chosen to be awake when the rest of the world is still sleeping. It was the first time in months that I felt like I belonged somewhere. Cooking became my evening meditation, not the quick, efficient meals I used to throw together between work and family obligations, but actual cooking. I bought a cast iron skillet from a thrift store and seasoned it myself. Learned to make bread from scratch because the smell reminded me of being 7 years old at my grandmother's house, before everything got complicated. Taught myself to grow herbs on the tiny balcony, basil and rosemary and thyme that I could snip with scissors and add to whatever I was making. The balcony became my sanctuary. It was barely big enough for a small table and 2 chairs, but it faced west toward the mountains, and in the evenings I could sit there with a cup of tea and watch the sunset paint the sky in colors that looked too perfect to be real. I bought cheap plants from the farmer's market, succulents that could survive my inexperience, cherry tomatoes that grew like weeds, flowers whose names I learned from YouTube videos. Work felt different too. Summit Strategies was the same beige office building, The same conference rooms that smelled like stale coffee and ambition. The same clients who needed their portfolios managed and their retirement dreams validated. But I stopped staying late just to avoid going home to an empty apartment. Empty didn't feel like a problem anymore. It felt like possibility. My coworker Beth noticed the change first. "You seem, I don't know, lighter somehow," she said one Tuesday afternoon as we waited for the elevator. "Like you're not carrying around a piano on your shoulders anymore." I almost laughed at that. A piano was exactly what it had felt like. "Just making some changes," I'd told her. "Good changes from the look of it." But the silence from my family was its own kind of weight, not the crushing kind I'd expected, more like the phantom pain from a limb that's been amputated. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to text Emily about something funny I'd seen, or thinking about calling Mom to tell her about the bread I'd successfully made. Then I'd remember that they hadn't called me once since the hospital. Not once. The quiet got loudest on Sundays. That had always been family call day. Emily updating everyone on wedding plans, Mom sharing neighborhood gossip, Dad grunting his approval or disapproval at whatever was happening on the news. I'd been part of that rhythm for 32 years, and now Sundays stretched out like empty highways. I filled them with farmers markets and long walks through the Biltmore village, with reorganizing my bookshelf and trying new recipes that I'd never had time for before. But there was always that moment around 3 p.m. when the loneliness would hit like a wave, sudden and complete. Not sadness, exactly. More like the feeling you get when you realize you've been holding your breath for so long, you forgot what it felt like to breathe normally. The worst part was how easily they'd let me go. No follow-up calls to check on my recovery. No casual texts asking how I was feeling. No invitations to Sunday dinner or family barbecues. It was like I'd never existed at all. Like 32 years of being someone's daughter and sister had been erased as cleanly as deleting a contact from a phone. But I was learning something in that quiet apartment with its creaky floors and mountain views. I was learning the difference between being alone and being abandoned. Being alone was a choice I was making every morning when I laced up my running shoes and every evening when I watered my plants. Being abandoned was something that had been done to me, something I'd survived. And survival, it turned out, was a lot more powerful than I'd ever imagined. 3 months after the hospital, I was stronger than I'd been in years. Not just physically, though the running had given me muscles I'd forgotten I had, emotionally, mentally, like I'd been living in a house with all the windows painted shut and someone had finally handed me a sledgehammer. I should have known it was too good to last. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, thick and cream-colored, the kind of paper that whispers "expensive" when you touch it. My name was written across the front in Mom's careful cursive, the same handwriting that had labeled my school lunch bags and signed permission slips for field trips I'd forgotten about. I almost threw it away. 4 months of silence. And now this. I stood in my tiny kitchen, still in my running clothes from my morning 5-miler, holding this piece of my old life like it might explode in my hands. The return address was Mom and Dad's house in Knoxville, but the weight of it suggested this wasn't just a random thinking of you card. I made coffee first, drew it out, grinding the beans by hand, heating the water to exactly the right temperature, doing all the little rituals I'd developed in my new life, as if I could postpone whatever was in that envelope by focusing on the familiar comfort of my morning routine. When I finally opened it, my hands were steadier than I expected. The invitation was everything Emily had ever dreamed of. Thick cardstock with gold foil lettering, tissue paper inserts, a separate card for the reception details. Emily Rose Martinez and Robert James Whitfield request the honor of your presence. The date was set for December 15th at the Foundry at Hickory Hills, one of those barn-turned wedding venue places that charged a fortune to make rich people feel rustic for a day. But it was the handwritten note tucked behind the RSVP card that made my blood pressure spike. Madison. It began in Mom's neat script. This is Emily's special day, the wedding she's dreamed about since she was a little girl. We know you've been going through some things lately. and we hope you're feeling better. Emily's vision for her perfect day includes having it at the Foundry, but the venue fee is $25,000, more than we had budgeted. We were hoping you might be able to help make her dream come true by contributing toward the venue cost. Family is everything, and this would mean the world to all of us. Love, Mom and Dad. I read it 3 times before the words actually sank in. $25,000. For a venue. For a wedding. For the sister who hadn't sent so much as a "How are you feeling?" text since I'd nearly died in a hospital room. I set the note down on my kitchen counter and stared at it like it was written in a foreign language. Maybe I was misunderstanding something. Maybe this was some kind of joke, or a test, but no. The letterhead at the top of the venue information card showed the price breakdown clearly. $25,000 for the venue rental, and they wanted me to cover the entire amount. My phone rang before I could fully process what I was reading. Mom's name lit up the screen, the first time she'd called since the hospital. "Hi, sweetie." Her voice was bright, artificially cheerful in that way she got when she wanted something. "Did you get Emily's invitation? Isn't it beautiful? She spent months working with the designer to get everything just right." "I got it," I said, my voice coming out flatter than I intended. "Oh, good. And you saw our little note about the venue? I know it's a big ask, but Emily's heart is just set on the Foundry. She and Robert looked at dozens of places, and nothing else compared. You know how particular she is about these things." $25,000, Mom! There was a pause. "Well, yes, it's an investment in Emily's happiness. And really, when you think about it as a family contribution to the most important day of her life." Where was the family when I was in the hospital? The words came out before I could stop them, hanging in the air like a challenge. The silence that followed stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. "Madison, that's different. You're fine now, aren't you? You said you were feeling better." I said I was feeling better because nobody asked how I was feeling when it mattered. "We were worried about you, sweetheart. Of course we were. But Emily's been planning this wedding for 8 months, and the deposit deadline is next week. If we don't secure the venue, she'll have to find somewhere else, like every other bride who can't afford a $25,000 party barn." Madison Rose Clark. Mom's voice shifted into that tone I remembered from childhood, the one that meant I was being unreasonable and disappointing. "I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this attitude is not like you. Emily is your sister. This is her wedding. Family helps family." "Does it?" I asked, because I'm trying to remember when family helped me. "We've always been here for you. You know that." "Were you here when I was throwing up blood in my apartment before the surgery? Were you here when I woke up at 3 in the morning convinced I was dying? Were you here when I was so weak I could barely walk to the mailbox?" My voice was rising, but I couldn't stop it, because I was here for all of that. Mom, all by myself. "You never said you needed us to come." I shouldn't have had to ask. Another silence. When Mom spoke again, her voice was cooler, more distant. "Well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but Emily's wedding is happening whether you want to be part of it or not. The question is whether you want to help your sister have the day she's dreamed of, or if you're going to let whatever issues you're working through ruin the most important moment of her life." The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost fell for it. Almost felt guilty for being the selfish sister who would put her own hurt feelings above Emily's happiness. Almost opened my mouth to say, of course I'd help. Of course I'd figure out how to come up with $25,000 I didn't have. Instead, I said, "I need to think about it. The deposit is due Monday. Madison, we can't wait forever." "Then don't." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with an anger I hadn't felt in months. Not the clean anger that comes from being wronged by a stranger, but the messy, complicated anger that comes from realizing the people who are supposed to love you most have been using you all along. I looked at the invitation again, spread across my kitchen counter like evidence in a crime I was just beginning to understand. The gold foil lettering seemed to mock me. All that expensive elegance for a day that would be forgotten in a year while the bills lasted for 5. $25,000. That was more than half my emergency fund, more than I'd saved in 2 years, more than some people made in a year, and they wanted me to hand it over like it was nothing, like I was nothing more than a walking bank account with sister privileges. But this time, for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't going to say yes just to keep the peace. This time, I was going to find out exactly how much my silence had been worth. I opened my laptop that night with the grim determination of an accountant investigating embezzlement, which, I was beginning to realize, wasn't far from the truth. My online banking went back 7 years, and I started there, methodically clicking through months of transactions. What I found made my stomach turn in a way that had nothing to do with my recent surgery. The pattern was so obvious once I started looking for it. How had I been blind to it for so long? March 2019. Transfer to Dad's account. $4,000. The memo line read, House Emergency, Foundation Repair. I remembered that call. Dad's voice heavy with worry about cracks in the basement wall, how the contractor needed payment up front. Just until insurance comes through, he'd promised. 2 weeks, tops. That was 4 years ago. The insurance money had apparently gotten lost in the mail. August 2020. Transfer to Emily's account. $6,500. Lost job. Rent help. Emily had been laid off from the boutique where she'd worked for exactly 3 months. She'd sobbed on the phone about how she'd never find anything else, how she'd have to move back in with Mom and Dad, how her life was over at 26. I'd transferred the money that same day, enough to cover 3 months of rent while she figured things out. She'd figured out a new job within 2 weeks, a better paying job, but somehow never figured out how to pay me back. November 2020. Transfer to Mom's account. $3,200. Dental emergency, root canal. Mom had been in excruciating pain and needed immediate treatment that wasn't covered by their insurance. I'd called her dentist directly to pay the bill, wanting to make sure she got the care she needed. Funny how that emergency happened right before their annual Florida vacation. The photos on Facebook showed them having a wonderful time at Disney World. January 2021. Transfer to Emily's account. $2,000. Car trouble, need repairs. Her Honda had broken down, and she needed it fixed to get to her new job. I'll pay you back with my first paycheck, she'd promised. The car trouble had been real. The payback had been imaginary. June 2021. Transfer to Dad's account. $1,800. Medical bills, urgent. Dad had been to the ER with chest pains that turned out to be acid reflux. The bills were piling up, and they were drowning in debt. September 2022. Transfer to Mom's account. $2,700. Furnace repair, emergency. The heating system had died right before winter, and they couldn't afford the replacement parts. April 2023. Transfer to Emily's account. $3,000. Credit card debt, help! Emily had gotten in over her head with wedding planning expenses and needed help making minimum payments before her credit score tanked. The list went on and on, a steady hemorrhage of money flowing from my account to theirs, never large enough to break me, always urgent enough to bypass my rational thinking, always accompanied by promises to pay me back as soon as possible, or when things get better, or after tax season. I pulled up my calculator app and started adding. 4,000, plus 6,500, plus 3,200, plus 2,000, plus 1,800, plus 2,700, plus 3,000. The total made me physically nauseous $22,200. $22,000 that I'd given to my family over the past 5 years. Money that had come out of my vacation fund, my emergency savings, my retirement contributions. Money I'd earned working overtime and weekends, pinching pennies on groceries and skipping dinners out with friends. Money that had never been repaid. Not a single dollar. I sat back in my chair, staring at the number on my screen. $22,000. Almost exactly the amount they were asking me to contribute to Emily's wedding venue. The coincidence felt like a slap across the face. I started taking screenshots, methodically documenting each transaction. The amounts, the dates, the memo lines full of promises that had never been kept. Then I opened a new spreadsheet and began organizing it all, creating a neat little ledger of my family's financial relationship with me. The pattern that emerged was damning. Every emergency had been followed within weeks by evidence of non-essential spending. Dad's foundation repair emergency was followed by a new 65-inch TV. Emily's rent crisis was followed by a weekend trip to Charleston with her friends. Mom's dental emergency was followed by that Disney vacation. They hadn't been struggling. They'd been spending my money on things they wanted but couldn't afford, using manufactured crises to guilt me into funding their lifestyle upgrades. But what made it even worse was the timing. I scrolled back through my text messages, matching dates. The requests for money always came when they knew I'd just gotten a bonus at work, or when I'd mentioned having a good month financially. They'd been watching my income like vultures circling a carcass, swooping in whenever they sensed opportunity. The most recent request had been in June, just 2 months before my surgery. Emily's credit card emergency had coincided perfectly with my mention of a promotion at Summit Strategies. $3,000 to help her get back on track financially. 2 months later, when I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed, that same sister couldn't be bothered to drive 2 hours to see if I was okay. I printed everything out, 3 copies, the bank statements, the spreadsheet, the transaction details. Then I put 1 copy in my filing cabinet, 1 in my desk at work, and 1 in an envelope that I sealed and dated. Evidence, in case I ever needed to prove what had happened. Because I was starting to understand that this wasn't just about money. This was about something much more fundamental. For 5 years, my family had been training me to be their solution to every problem, their answer to every want they couldn't afford. They'd turned me into a resource to be managed, not a person to be loved. And the truly heartbreaking part, I'd let them do it. I'd been so desperate to feel needed, so afraid of being left out or left behind, that I'd confused being used with being useful. I'd confused being drained with being generous. But you know what the final insult was? After 5 years of this pattern, after $22,000 in loans that would never be repaid, they still thought I was stupid enough to not notice. They still thought they could manipulate me with guilt and family obligation and the promise of belonging. They thought I hadn't learned anything lying in that hospital bed for 4 days, wondering if anyone would miss me if I died. They were about to find out how wrong they were. As I closed my laptop and headed to bed, one thought kept echoing in my mind. I wasn't just done being their ATM. I was done pretending this was what love looked like. Tomorrow, I was going to start showing them what consequences looked like instead. The website was called Emily and Robert's Forever Love Story, and it was exactly as nauseating as it sounded. I found it by accident while Googling Emily's name, trying to see if she'd posted anything public about the wedding costs. What I discovered was so much worse than I'd imagined. The homepage featured a professional engagement photo of Emily and Robert posed in front of some generic autumn backdrop, all golden light and fake wind-blown hair. Emily wore a flowing white dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and Robert looked like he'd stepped out of a country club catalog in his perfectly pressed khakis and navy blazer. But it was the Our Story section that made my blood pressure spike. Emily has always been the light of her family. The bio began. Born and raised in Knoxville, Tennessee, she's the cherished daughter of Patricia and Michael Martinez, who taught her the importance of family, tradition, and following your dreams. Growing up with their unwavering support, Emily learned early that love means always being there for the people who matter most. I read that line 3 times, each time feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. The unwavering support, always being there for the people who matter most. I kept scrolling. Emily's close-knit family has been her rock through every chapter of life. Her parents, Patricia and Michael, celebrated 42 years of marriage this past spring with a renewal ceremony surrounded by their loved ones. Emily's extended family includes her beloved aunts, uncles, and cousins who have shaped her into the caring, generous woman Robert fell in love with. The family tree section showed professional portraits of Mom and Dad, smiling like they'd never had a financial worry in their lives. Uncle Tony and Aunt Carol, who apparently counted as family despite living in different states and seeing us maybe twice a year. Even Robert's family got their own dedicated section with bios and photos. But I wasn't there. Not in the family tree, not in the Our Story section, not even mentioned in passing as the sister who'd helped fund Emily's life for the past 5 years. I was completely systematically erased. The photo gallery was even worse. There were pictures from family gatherings I remembered being at, Christmas mornings, birthday parties, graduation celebrations. But in every single one, I'd been cropped out. Not subtly, either. You could see where the photos had been edited. Strange blank spaces where a person should be standing. Awkward compositions that made no sense until you realized someone had been surgically removed. The Easter brunch photo from last year was the most obvious. I remembered that day clearly because I'd brought the expensive champagne Emily had specifically requested for mimosas. In the original photo, I'd been standing between Mom and Emily, laughing at something Dad had said. In the website version, there was just empty space between them, like a ghost had been standing there. But the wedding registry and contributions page was where they really showed their hand. Alongside the typical registry items, KitchenAid mixers and Egyptian cotton sheets and crystal wine glasses, was a section titled, "Help Us Build Our Dream Wedding." The language was carefully crafted to sound grateful rather than demanding, but the intent was clear. Your presence at our wedding is the greatest gift of all. However, if you'd like to contribute to making our special day even more magical, we've set up some options for those who want to help us create the wedding of our dreams. The list included photography package $3,500, floral arrangements $4,200, wedding cake $1,800, live band $6,000, open bar service $5,500, venue rental $25,000, priority need. Next to the venue rental was a note, "We've fallen in love with the perfect location for our ceremony and reception, but we need a little help making this dream come true. Any contribution toward our venue cost would mean the world to us." At the bottom of the page was a running total showing how much had been raised so far. Photography fully funded, floral arrangements 60% funded, wedding cake fully funded, venue rental 0% funded. They weren't asking everyone for money. They were asking everyone else for the small stuff and expecting me to cover the big ticket item. The venue cost was more than all the other requests combined. They'd crowdfunded a wedding and saved the largest expense for their personal ATM. I took screenshots of everything. The family tree without my name. The photos with me cropped out. The contribution page with the $25,000 expectation sitting there like a casual suggestion. The bio that painted them as a loving, supportive family while making me invisible. Then I found the guest list. It was hidden in a password-protected section. But Emily had always been terrible with technology. Her passwords were usually some variation of her name and birthday. It took me 3 tries to guess Emily 2024, and suddenly I had access to the entire wedding planning portal. 237 guests, extended family members I'd met maybe twice in my life, Robert's college roommates and their wives, Emily's sorority sisters from a decade ago, co-workers from jobs she'd had for 6 months, even our old neighbors from when we were kids, people Mom hadn't spoken to in years. But my name wasn't on the list. I wasn't invited to my own sister's wedding, not as family. Anyway, I was just expected to fund it. The seating chart was the final insult. I found it in the planning documents, a detailed layout of where everyone would sit during the reception, family table, wedding party table, college friends table, work friends table. Every single person had been carefully placed to maximize their comfort and enjoyment of Emily's special day. Except me, because I wasn't going to be there to enjoy anything. I was just supposed to write a check and disappear. I sat in my apartment until nearly midnight, scrolling through page after page of wedding planning that had erased me from my own family while expecting me to bankroll their celebration. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. How do you ask someone for $25,000 while simultaneously pretending they don't exist? But as I stared at those cropped photos and that empty space where my name should have been, something clicked into place. This wasn't carelessness or oversight. This was deliberate. They'd put thought into removing me from their narrative while keeping me in their financial plans. They wanted my money, but they didn't want me. They'd figured out how to have the ATM without dealing with the person attached to it. The realization should have hurt more than it did. Maybe I was finally all cried out, or maybe I'd just reached the point where anger was stronger than grief. But looking at that website, their perfect, sanitized version of our family with me airbrushed out of existence, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Clarity. For the first time since that wedding invitation arrived, I knew exactly what I was going to do. And for the first time in 5 years, it wasn't going to be what they expected. They wanted to erase me from their story. Fine, but they were about to learn that the person holding the purse strings gets to write the ending. And this ending was going to be very different from what they'd planned. I called Mom at 8:15 the next morning, right after my run when my endorphins were high and my resolve was steel. I wanted to be clear-headed for this conversation, not clouded by anger or hurt. I wanted to hear exactly what she'd say when confronted with the truth. Madison, sweetie. Her voice was bright with artificial cheer. I was hoping you'd call. Have you had a chance to think about Emily's venue situation? The deadline is getting so close, and she's just beside herself with worry. I found Emily's wedding website, I said without preamble. There was a pause. Oh, isn't it beautiful? She worked so hard on that. Robert's cousin is a graphic designer, and she did such a lovely job with the layout. It's interesting reading, I continued, keeping my voice level, especially the part about your close-knit, supportive family. Well, we are close-knit, you know that. Am I close-knit, Mom? Because I'm not mentioned anywhere on that website, not in the family section, not in the photos, not even in the guest list. But somehow I'm supposed to contribute $25,000 to this celebration I'm not invited to. The silence stretched long enough that I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its cheerfulness. Madison, you're being dramatic. Of course you're invited. Your family. Really, because your daughter seems to have forgotten that when she was planning her wedding, I'm not on the guest list. Mom. I checked. That has to be a mistake. Emily would never. Emily cropped me out of every single family photo on that website. There are pictures from events I was at, celebrations I helped pay for, and I've been edited out like I never existed. So, let me ask you again. Does Emily actually want me at her wedding, or does she just want my money? Another pause. When Mom spoke again, her tone had shifted into that careful, diplomatic voice she used when she was trying to manage a situation. Madison, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. Emily has been under so much stress with the wedding planning, and maybe some things got overlooked in the website design. But that doesn't mean she doesn't want you there. Of course she wants you there. Then why didn't she call me herself? Why didn't she ask me personally to contribute to her venue cost? Why did I get a note from you and Dad instead of a conversation with my sister? Because she was embarrassed. Sweetheart, you know how proud Emily is. It's hard for her to ask for help, especially something this big. I almost laughed at that. Too embarrassed to ask for $25,000, but not too embarrassed to erase me from her wedding website. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Emily loves you. We all love you. But this wedding is important to her, and if you can help make it perfect. Like I helped when Dad needed money for the foundation repair, like I helped when Emily lost her job, like I helped when you needed dental work. My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I've been helping this family for 5 years. Mom, $22,000 worth of helping. and not once has anyone paid me back. Not once. That's different. Those were emergencies. No, they weren't. I pulled up my spreadsheet on my laptop, reading from my carefully compiled evidence. Dad's foundation emergency was followed by a new television. Emily's job loss was followed by a vacation to Charleston. Your dental emergency was followed by a trip to Disney World. Those weren't emergencies. Mom, those were me funding your lifestyle choices. The silence that followed was different, not confused or surprised, but caught, like she'd been hoping I wouldn't notice, and now she had to figure out how to respond to someone who had. Madison Rose, I don't like what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I have bank records going back 5 years. I have screenshots of social media posts showing what you spent money on right after asking me for emergency funds. I have documentation of every promise to pay me back that never happened. Money isn't everything. Madison, family is more important than keeping score of every dollar. You're right. Family is more important. So where was my family when I was in the hospital? Where were the people I'd been supporting financially for 5 years when I was lying in a hospital bed wondering if I was going to survive surgery? We knew you were going to be fine. You're strong. You've always been strong. I wasn't strong, Mom. I was scared and alone and sick. I was throwing up blood for 3 days before I went to the emergency room because I didn't want to bother anyone. I almost died from sepsis because I was more worried about inconveniencing my family than I was about my own health. That's not our fault. You should have called if you needed us. I shouldn't have had to call. When someone you love is in the hospital, you show up. When someone you love is having surgery, you check on them. When someone you love almost dies, you don't wait for an invitation to care. We care about you. We've always cared about you. No. You care about what I can do for you. There's a difference. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what came next. So let me be very clear about Emily's wedding. I'm not contributing $25,000 to a venue for a wedding I'm not actually invited to attend. If Emily wants me there as her sister, she can call me herself and have that conversation. If she wants my money, she can find someone else to ask. Madison, you're being unreasonable. This is Emily's wedding, her one special day. And it was my one life-threatening illness, but somehow that didn't warrant a phone call, let alone a visit. So Emily can have her special day without my financial contribution. You're going to regret this. Family is all you have in this world, and you're throwing it away over money. I'm not throwing anything away. Mom, I'm just finally learning the difference between family and people who share my DNA. Real family doesn't disappear when you need them and reappear when they need something from you. So that's it. You're just going to abandon Emily on the most important day of her life. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just not funding a party I'm not invited to. If Emily wants to talk to me directly, as her sister, I'm here. If she wants to include me in her wedding as family, I'm here. But if she just wants my money while pretending I don't exist, then no, I'm not here for that anymore. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline and something that might have been relief. For the first time in 5 years, I'd said no to my family's financial demands. For the first time in my adult life, I'd refused to be treated like a resource instead of a relative. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. My phone started ringing again immediately. Mom's name flashed on the screen, then again, then again. I turned it off and went to make breakfast, my appetite returning for the first time in days. Outside my kitchen window, the mountains were sharp and clear against the autumn sky, beautiful and permanent and completely indifferent to the human drama playing out in apartments and wedding venues across the country. I was learning to be a little more like those mountains, beautiful in my own space, permanent in my own values, and completely indifferent to people who wanted to use me up and throw me away. It was the most peaceful I'd felt in months. The video idea came to me at 2:30 in the morning, when I was lying in bed replaying the conversation with Mom for the 100th time. I'd been stewing in my own anger for 3 days, and anger without action was just poison you drink hoping someone else will get sick. I needed to do something, not something dramatic or vindictive, just something honest, something that would make the truth visible in a way that couldn't be ignored or explained away. I set up my phone on the kitchen counter the next evening, angling it so the mountain view was visible through the window behind me. Natural light, no fancy editing, just me and my story. I wanted it to feel real because it was real. "Hi," I started, then stopped, cleared my throat and started again. "My name is Madison Clark. I'm 32 years old. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and I almost died 4 months ago." I kept my voice steady, conversational, like I was talking to a friend over coffee instead of creating evidence of my family's abandonment. I had what was supposed to be routine gallbladder surgery that turned into a life-threatening case of sepsis. I was in the hospital for 4 days, and I came very close to not making it out alive. During those 4 days, not one member of my immediate family came to see me. Not my parents, not my sister, not a phone call, not a text asking how I was doing. Nothing. I paused, letting that sink in. On camera, I looked calmer than I felt. The months of running and sleeping well and eating actual meals had given me back some color, some strength. I didn't look like the broken woman who'd left the hospital in October. Fast forward to last week, I get this in the mail. I held up Emily's wedding invitation, letting the camera focus on the expensive paper and gold foil lettering. My sister's wedding invitation? Beautiful. Right, very expensive. And tucked inside was this. I unfolded Mom's handwritten note and read it verbatim. Every word about Emily's dream wedding and the $25,000 venue fee they wanted me to cover. $25,000, I repeated, from the family that couldn't be bothered to visit me when I was dying. But here's the really interesting part. I pulled up Emily's wedding website on my laptop, turning the screen toward the camera. This is my sister's wedding website. Beautiful design. Lots of information about the happy couple and their families. Let me show you the family section. I scrolled through slowly, letting the camera see each smiling face and carefully crafted bio. Here are my parents, Patricia and Michael. Here are the aunts and uncles. Here are Robert's family members. And here, well, here's where I should be. But I'm not. I clicked through the photo gallery, showing the cropped images where I'd been edited out. These are pictures from family events I attended, family gatherings I was part of. But somehow, I've disappeared from all of them. It's like I never existed. The most damning part was the guest list screenshot I'd taken. And here's the guest list for the wedding, 237 people. Distant relatives, college friends, neighbors from 20 years ago, but not me. I'm not invited to my own sister's wedding. I'm just expected to pay for it. I pulled out my printed bank statements, the spreadsheet I'd created documenting 5 years of financial exploitation. See, this isn't the first time my family has needed money. In the past 5 years, I've given them over $22,000, emergency after emergency, crisis after crisis. And you know what happened after each emergency. They went on vacation. They bought luxury items. They upgraded their lifestyle with my money. I held up printouts of their social media posts, carefully dated and organized. Dad's foundation emergency was followed by a new 75-inch TV. Emily's job loss crisis was followed by a weekend trip to Charleston. Mom's dental emergency was followed by a Disney World vacation. Every single time, my emergency loan became their discretionary spending. My voice was getting stronger, more confident. This felt good. It felt like finally telling the truth after years of pretending everything was normal. I want to be clear about something. I'm not making this video to hurt anyone or to air dirty laundry for entertainment. I'm making it because I've learned something important about the difference between family and people who just happen to share your DNA. I looked directly into the camera, speaking to whoever might see this someday. Real family shows up when you're sick. Real family doesn't disappear during your darkest moments and reappear when they need money. Real family doesn't erase you from their wedding website while asking you to fund their dream venue. I held up the wedding invitation one more time. So, to answer the question in my mother's note, no, I will not be contributing $25,000 to my sister's wedding venue. Not because I don't love her, but because love has to go both ways. You can't withdraw from an account you never deposit into. I paused, thinking about how to end this. I didn't want to sound bitter or vindictive. I just wanted to sound done. To anyone watching this who recognizes this pattern in their own life, you're worth more than what you can provide for other people. Your value isn't measured by your bank account or your willingness to solve other people's problems. And family that only sees you as a solution to their financial issues isn't really family at all. I reached forward and stopped the recording. The video was 8 minutes and 43 seconds long. I watched it twice, making sure I hadn't said anything I'd regret. I hadn't used profanity, hadn't made personal attacks, hadn't shared anything that wasn't documentably true. I'd just told my story with evidence to back it up. I uploaded it to a private YouTube link and sent it to 3 people: my best friend Sarah from college, my coworker Beth, who'd noticed how much lighter I seemed lately, and my cousin Jake, Dad's nephew who'd always been the straight shooter in the family. "This is what's been happening," I wrote in the message. "I thought you should know." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Within an hour, Sarah called me crying. "Madison, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me how bad it was?" Beth texted, "Holy shit. I knew something was wrong with your family situation, but this is insane. Good for you for finally standing up to them." Jake called at 11:30 that night, his voice tight with anger. "I saw the video. Is all of this true? The money? The hospital? Everything?" "Every word," I told him. "Jesus Christ, Madison, I'm sharing this with a few people. This needs to be seen." I should have stopped him, should have asked him to keep it private, to limit who saw it. But part of me, the part that had been silenced and used and erased, wanted people to know, wanted the truth to have legs. "Okay," I said, "but Jake only share it with people who know our family. I don't want this to go viral or anything crazy." "Of course," he promised. By morning, my phone was buzzing with notifications I'd never expected. Comments, messages, shares. The video that was supposed to stay within my small circle was spreading through the interconnected web of family friends, church communities, and small-town connections that make up life in Tennessee and North Carolina. People were watching, people were talking, and in 3 weeks, when Emily walked down the aisle at whatever venue she'd managed to afford without my money, everyone would know exactly why I wasn't there. The truth, it turned out, was a much more powerful weapon than I'd ever imagined. The wedding was supposed to start at 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon in December. I know this because I was getting updates all day from people who were there, people who had seen my video and decided I deserved to know how it all went down. I spent that morning hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains, my phone on airplane mode, breathing in the cold air and feeling more at peace than I had in years. When I finally turned my phone back on at 3:30, I had 47 text messages waiting. The first one was from Jake. "It's a shit show. You need to see this." Apparently, my video hadn't stayed as contained as I'd hoped. It had jumped from family circles to church groups to neighborhood Facebook pages. By Friday night, half of Knoxville had seen it. By Saturday morning, it was the main topic of conversation at the Foundry at Hickory Hills. Sarah sent me a play-by-play. "Your cousin Margaret just stood up during the ceremony and started reading your bank statements out loud. Emily is crying. Robert looks like he wants to disappear. Your mom is trying to get Margaret to sit down, but she's not having it." Another text from Beth. Someone recorded Margaret's speech and posted it on Instagram. "This is wild." Then Jake again. "Your dad just walked out, just left. Emily's still at the altar, but half the guests are talking among themselves. This is insane." The ceremony had apparently devolved into chaos. Margaret, Dad's sister who'd never been one to keep quiet about family drama, had come prepared with printed copies of my bank statements and transaction records. She'd stood up right after the "Speak Now or Forever Hold Your Peace" moment and delivered what witnesses described as a devastating accounting of financial abuse. $22,000. she'd announced to the 237 guests. That's how much Madison gave this family over 5 years, and when she was dying in a hospital, none of them could be bothered to visit her. But they wanted $25,000 more for this party. Emily had tried to continue with the ceremony, but the damage was done. Guests were whispering, phones were out recording, and Robert's family was asking pointed questions about the kind of people their son was marrying into. The reception was worse. According to multiple sources, Robert's mother had cornered my parents at the head table and demanded an explanation for why they'd asked their daughter for wedding money while excluding her from the wedding. When Mom tried to explain that I'd been going through some things lately, Mrs. Whitfield had apparently responded with something like, going through cancer surgery alone because her family abandoned her. Those kinds of things. By 7 o'clock, the bride and groom had left their own reception. By 8, most of the guests had followed. By 9, my parents were sitting alone at a table covered in untouched wedding cake, fielding calls from relatives who'd seen the video and wanted answers. Jake called me at 10:15. "Madison, I think you broke your sister's wedding." "I didn't do anything," I said, and meant it. "I just told the truth." Well, the truth just cost them about $50,000 in wedding expenses and possibly Robert's family's respect. His mom is apparently reconsidering whether Emily is the right fit for their family. I should have felt guilty. Should have felt bad about ruining Emily's perfect day. But sitting in my peaceful apartment with my plants and my mountain view and my bank account that was finally mine again, I felt something else entirely. Relief. For the first time in 5 years, there were consequences. For the first time in my adult life, my family couldn't just take what they wanted from me and move on like nothing had happened. The truth had cost them something, and maybe now they'd understand what it felt like to lose something important. My phone kept buzzing with messages from relatives, family friends, even people I barely knew who'd heard the story secondhand. Most were supportive. Some were shocked. A few were angry with me for airing family business publicly. But the message that mattered most came at 11:45 that night, from a number I didn't recognize. "Madison, this is Robert. I'm sorry about everything. I had no idea about the hospital or the money or any of it. Emily told me you were just being difficult about the wedding costs. I want you to know that if I'd known the truth, things would have been very different. I hope you can forgive us someday. We're going to marriage counseling to work through this. Emily has a lot to figure out about what family really means." I stared at that message for a long time. It was the first real apology I'd gotten from anyone connected to this mess, not from Emily herself, not from my parents, but from the person who'd married into this dysfunction and was apparently just now realizing what he'd gotten himself into. I didn't respond to Robert's text, but I saved it. Someday, maybe, there could be a conversation about forgiveness and rebuilding, but not yet. Not until the people who'd actually wronged me were ready to acknowledge what they'd done. 3 months later, I'm still living in my mountain apartment, still running every morning, still growing herbs on my balcony. I got a promotion at work and a raise that I'm putting directly into my retirement fund. No more emergency loans to family members. No more funding other people's dreams while ignoring my own. Emily and Robert are still married, as far as I know. But the honeymoon period ended before they got back from their actual honeymoon. The video destroyed the fairy tale narrative they'd built around their perfect love story, and apparently it's been hard to rebuild. Mom calls sometimes, usually when she's been drinking, to tell me I ruined Emily's life and destroyed the family. I listen for a while, then hang up when she starts repeating herself. Dad hasn't called at all, which is probably for the best. But here's what I've learned in the aftermath of the wedding. That wasn't the truth is a powerful thing, but it's also dangerous. Once you speak it out loud, you can't control where it goes or who it hurts. You just have to decide whether living with the lie is worse than dealing with the consequences of honesty. For me, it wasn't even close. I'd rather live alone with my integrity than surrounded by people who only loved what I could do for them. Some bridges are worth burning, especially when they only led to places that drained your soul. And sometimes, The most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop enabling their worst behavior, even if it means they hate you for it. I sleep better at night knowing I chose myself for once. That has to count for something. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it resonates with anyone who's ever felt like they were being used by the people who were supposed to love them most. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to connect with others who've been through similar experiences. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts about family boundaries and knowing your worth. Your stories matter too.